So I was thinking about what to chat about today, and I figured, doesn't matter if you're doing a podcast or a video or whatever, we're basically telling a story. So I figured I wanted to go back to the basics a little bit on the 3 foundations of telling a great story. What entails in a great story? So even though Gregory just introduced me, I'll just introduce myself one more time. I'm Colleen. I'm with Hoopla Media. I produce and direct and edit a wide range of primarily video production. Podcasting has been something that is a slightly newer medium that we're starting to get into, but nonetheless, like I said earlier, it's just all storytelling. So it's all the same thing. So I'm going to go through 3 tips for everyone. The first one is nailing your opener. So whether it's, no matter what sort of story you're telling, you want to make sure that you're capturing your audience right off the bat, especially in that podcast landscape, which I've been learning over the course of the past year and a half or so, is that there's a ton of noise in this landscape and you're going to lose your audience real quick. So you want to make sure that your opener is really strong. There are 3 main types of openers that I tend to see in this particular landscape. I'm sure there's more, but I'm going to go through 3 examples of types of openers that you could potentially work with when telling your story. So the first one is, I call it the cold opener. So this opener is where you're jumping right in. I'm going to play this clip first real quick before explaining a little bit further what that opener looks like. So bear with me.
And a lot of veteran entrepreneurs will say, oh yeah, I'm just better than everybody. I offer quality work at a cheaper price. That's what everybody says. If you look at all your competition's websites or marketing materials, it's quality work and low price.
All right, I'm going to stop it right there. So that is a podcast that's actually based out of Edmonton, a company called Jobber who works on management software for contract-based work like painters, house cleaners, that sort of thing. So they, you notice they went right into a clip. We didn't know who was talking. We didn't know a lot about that particular individual, but it's a really strong quote from that person. So anybody who's interested in, say, painters or like small business, something like that's going to really capture that particular audience. Then what that does is it builds out your story, so then you can either circle back to that particular clip, or in your introduction afterwards, you can set up the story by telling the audience what they've just heard. So that's the cold opener. The next one I call the introduction. So this is something that's, we're gonna set the story up for you. This is really common, I find, in podcasting when you, especially something that's being hosted by someone, they're setting up the story for you prior to basically starting the story. I'm going to show you one of my all-time favorites. If you haven't listened to Gimlet's Reply All, please do. They're amazing. And they always have like a little bit of banter right off the top before they get into the story, which I like. A lot of true crime podcasts do this too.
This episode is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda has been around for 100 years. Learn more at mazda.ca.
From Gimlet, this is Reply All. I'm Alex Goldman.
And PJ Vogt.
PJ? Yes. So about 7 months ago, the end of January, I had just spent a long afternoon recording with producer Damiano Marchetti. And just during a break, I got a phone call from a 1-800 number. And I don't know what it is about 1-800 numbers. My natural impulse is to just be curious as to who's calling me. So I always pick them up.
Really?
Always.
Okay, I'm going to pause it right there. Also, screenshot this. If you haven't listened to Long Distance by Reply All, it is the craziest, most insane story. Just, it's the best. So watch it or listen to it. So that's the introduction. So what that entailed is you could tell that the hosts were chatting with each other, and it was like one host was setting up the story for the other host. That's something that Gregory and I work with quite a bit when, with our podcast. And it gives the audience an opportunity to feel like they're having a cup of coffee with a friend. So it really builds that relationship with the hosts. It builds that trust. And it's a great way to tell a story too. The next one, I just put this one briefly. I call it just the generic, and Reply All has something similar to it where you notice they had an opener and then they went into their introduction. There's some podcasts that'll go just directly into their opener, which it's good to note, but unless you're Michelle Obama's podcast, I would probably shy away from this one. So you want to have something that's a little bit more tailored than that, than just a generic opener for each of your podcasts, in my opinion. So that's the first tip that I have, are those 3 openers. The next one is probably even more important, I would say. It's getting the most out of your interviews. So this one, I've broken it down into 3 steps. The first is you want to, when you're going into an interview, you want to make sure that you're prepared. You want to do your homework. So this can look like something as simple as Googling your subject or the organization that the subject works for, or whatever your storyline entails. Or it can go to something a little bit more in depth, like setting up a pre-interview with your subject and having a chat with them to dig a little bit deeper as to what they're all about, what their organization is all about, and using that information that you find with your research to create a sort of a roadmap, or what I like to say, your skeleton story. So you'll have a basic idea of what your story is going to look like before the interview even happens. I want to just note what's important for this part is to make sure that you're setting your intention. So you want to make sure that that intention is clear. And I'll give you a quick example from a video project that we did 2 years ago now that entailed working with parents who have lost a child or a loved one to opioids. So when going into this project, it was really, really important that we set that intention, that we were there to highlight the devastating effects surrounding the stigma around opioids. We weren't there to exploit the tragedy itself. And it's really important to make that distinction between the two, because if you don't set a strong intention for your interviews, sometimes it'll end up going into a direction that you either don't want it to go in or that you weren't prepared for, which isn't always a bad thing, but being prepared, making sure you have the bones of the story, making sure you have those clear intentions will help you get the most out of your story. The second, and I feel like I'm already almost at 10 minutes, aren't I? Okay, I'm gonna make this real fast. The second one is just be a human. So you want to keep it casual. You want to build a rapport with your interviewee by talking about anything else. Just talk about anything. Have a laugh with them. You want to build some sort of relationship before diving in to that particular subject matter. You are going to get more out of your subject when you become closer to a friend than some sort of stranger with a microphone in their face. And you're going to get just way better stuff from them. The last one I have out of this tip is to dig deep. So what I mean by that is creating open-ended questions and making sure you have a prepared document of interview questions. There's 2 quick little tips that I want to give in this section. The first one is very simple. It's just creating open-ended questions. You never want to have a question where the answer to it is going to be yes or no. The second tip is I just want to go back to that one real quick. With your questions, you're giving your interviewee the opportunity to tell their story. So it's important to make sure that your question is basically a platform for them to just continue on with their story. Another thing I like to do for interviews is to have a bit of a toolkit of similar questions that might elicit a different emotion. So an example of this would be, say you're interviewing somebody who won an award. Your first question may be, what did you feel, or how proud are you that you won this award? Kind of basic question. You might not get a ton from them. So maybe after that, you're digging a little bit deeper and say, tell me about the moment you heard your name. How did you feel? What was that feeling that came over you? So you're going to get a similar answer, but you're pulling more emotion from that subject. Lastly, and real quick, my third tip is music. So music can either really help your story or it can hinder your story. I like to use music as kind of like, think of it as like, it's the condiments. It's like that piece of fashion that you want to wear it. You don't want it to wear you. So use it sparingly and just use it to elicit that emotional response, but make sure it's within that same emotion range as the interview. So if you had a pretty flat interview, you don't want to try and force that emotion by putting in a really emotional track. It's going to seem a little too contrived that way. For some music, I just put down a few websites that don't suck. We use Soundstripe quite a bit. It's a subscription-based site. It's pretty great. Premium Beat is also a really good one. We use MusicBed, but that one's a bit more expensive. And surprisingly, Pond5, it's pretty good. They're getting better and better. So these are just a couple of sites if you're looking for non-copyright music to pull from for your podcasts. These are some pretty good ones to check out. I'm sure other people have some really great sites as well. So if you Google music sites, there's new ones that are added. I feel like they're getting more and more popular now. With that, we're done.